So if you're clicking on this video, then chances are that you've heard about Anki and you've heard quite a few people talking about how useful it is in helping you learn. In this video, I'll hopefully explain how I personally use Anki and Excel as an A-level student in order to help me learn all the content I need for my exams. Now, just for some background, I'm currently in year 13 studying biology, chemistry, maths and psychology, and I feel like Anki has really played a large role in helping me manage my revision and be able to effectively go through all the content. So this video is really going to be split up into multiple categories, and right now I'm going to put the different sections on the screen along with some timestamps, so hopefully you guys will be able to jump around, find what you're looking for, and maybe take some value from this video as you watch me just studying in the background. Now before we go straight into actually making the cards or memorizing all the content, I think it's really important to make a note of the importance of actually understanding before you do anything. Now, everyone talks about how amazing Anki is and how good it actually is for memorizing all this content, and a beginner's mistake might be to go straight into making your flashcards and going through them over and over again. But in reality, if you haven't understood a concept properly, then there's no way you can actually memorize it. And what I mean by that is you might know the fact in isolation and you might be able to recall it on its own, but you have no idea where it fits into the larger picture of your content, and really it's pointless because you can't do anything with that single isolated fact. And just to illustrate this, I'm going to give you guys an example that I think really highlights this. Now in this example, I just want you guys to imagine that English is the only language you can speak and you know no other secondary language. Now if I put a few words on the screen right now, as you can see, you should be able to memorize them relatively easily. Now if I get these exact same words and put them on the screen again, but this time in a different language, for example Arabic, then chances are, even if you taught yourself how to just read the Arabic writing, you wouldn't actually be able to memorize it as easily because the words have no meaning to you and you can't really make any associations in your head. Now everyone goes about trying to understand the content differently, and it's really up to what works best for you. Personally, I don't really set aside a period of time to understand the content. I usually like to do it as I'm going, but I will make a conscious effort to understand it. Typically, it's really good if you just put in that extra bit of effort and pay attention in class, and that way when it comes to actually making your Anki cards, you don't have to do as much work because you've already got an understanding of the content from your lessons. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, I'm going to move on to how I actually make my Anki cards. Now, I prefer to start off by writing all my cards out in Excel. Now, although this might take a bit longer in the long run, I feel like despite the fact that Anki has been such a game changer, especially for me as a student, I feel the user interface isn't the best, and I find it really hard to just navigate through all my cards and make changes or edits. Whereas when I use Excel, I can have a quick overview of all my cards and I can make any adjustments or changes by looking at my cards in a holistic way. Now the way I actually make the cards is by splitting the columns in Excel into two and treating the first column as almost like the front of the card and the second column as the back. So I'll put a little picture on the screen right now to hopefully make that make a bit more sense. And essentially, after I've done making all those cards, I will then transfer them into Anki. Now, that might sound like a really tedious process, but don't worry, I will be showing you a really quick way to get it all done. Now that I've mentioned why I like to use Excel before converting all my cards into Anki, let's actually go into detail about how I go about making the cards as effectively as possible, because obviously as a beginner it's really hard to know what to put into your flashcards, and obviously just putting in heaps and heaps of content isn't really gonna give much in return because it's going to be a lot harder to remember everything. So my first point whenever I make any cards is to try and keep them as short and concise as possible. I find that the more information I put into a card, the harder it is to memorize, and it also makes the task of rating the cards a lot more difficult. So as you guys may know, Anki has a feature where you have to rate the cards whether or not you found them difficult, easy, or kind of in the middle, and based on those ratings, Anki will decide how often to give you the cards. So to put it simply, a card that you find really easy will appear less often, and a card that you might be struggling with will appear a lot more frequently. Now, I find that the more information you put in the card, the harder it is to reach a conclusion as to how well you feel you know the card. For example, if you have 4 different points on one card and you get 3 out of the 4 points correct, it becomes quite a big conflict on how to rate that card, because you can rate the card as easy and it will come up less often, and so that 1 point that you weren't really that confident on won't really be given to you. Whereas if you mark the card as difficult, then you're going to find yourself constantly rereading information that you already know confidently, and so then spaced repetition can't really take place because the intervals in which you're recalling the information is too short for the active recall to actually take effect. Now, for this reason, I prefer to use much smaller, shorter cards, and although you end up having a lot more cards to have to go through, I feel like after a few reviews and after Anki's algorithm really goes into action, those numbers will decrease by a large amount, and by a few weeks or months, you will find that the number of cards you have to deal with on a daily basis is much less daunting than at the start. And it will also mean that Anki can make sure you're reviewing the parts of the content that you struggle with, and will prevent you from wasting your time going over the content you actually understand really well. Now, there are obviously pros and cons to making your cards a lot shorter. I think the biggest issue I found with making shorter cards was that sometimes I'd have no context of the information I was given. So, kind of like what I said in the previous example of understanding content before memorizing it, is that I would know the contents of the cards, but I wouldn't really understand where it fit in the bigger picture. And so, one thing I did to kind of get over that issue was when I actually made the card, I would make a mental note of the context of for example, the textbook page I was extracting the information from. So, for example, if I can remember a certain picture or a diagram on the textbook from where I got that information from, I'll try and keep that in mind when I'm recalling the information, and that way when I go through the cards, I know exactly where the cards have come from and what part of the textbook slash topic that is from. Now, you could make your decks very specific, and so that way you won't have that issue, but for me personally, I didn't make my decks too specific. I basically just split them up into subjects, and then I split them up into chapters, and that was it. And I know some people who will go further and split up into sub chapters or make even smaller decks. Now, for me personally, I didn't like the hassle of having too many decks. I felt like it became much harder for me to organize, so I prefer to have much broader decks. But obviously it's all about experimenting, and it's all about finding what works best for you and using that method, because it's not really a one size fits all, and you might find something that's more effective and I might find something that's more effective, and it's all about experimenting and finding that middle ground. So the next concept I just want to go through is this idea of retrieval versus recognition. So when we're going through our cards, we need to see whether or not we're retrieving the information from the card or whether we're just recognizing the card. Now, I found that this was especially the case for me when it came to keywords, where when I was given a keyword, I could easily define it, but when given a definition, I couldn't really find the word that was associated with it. And especially in psychology, where it was a similar case, I could describe a study if I was given the name of the psychologist, but sometimes when I was given a study, I could not think of the psychologist who conducted the study. And I think a large part of that was because I'd recognized the names, but I hadn't done the opposite association. So what I like to do to counteract that is I like to essentially make reverse cards on Excel. And I'm going to put an example on the screen right now on how I do that, and hopefully it should make a bit more sense. Now, I know that Anki do have this feature called the reverse card feature, and I do sometimes use it, but because I make all my cards on Excel first, I find it's a lot less hassle just doing it on Excel first, and then when I transfer them into Anki, I don't have to worry about that. And again, I know this really increases the amount of cards you have to go through, but I think in the long run, it can be really useful when you're in an exam or you're doing a test and you can remember something, but you can't remember the word that's associated with it. So you remember the definition, but you don't actually remember the key word that describes it. And so this will really help overcome that issue. And I find that it was an issue that I had. So hopefully, maybe if anyone else had the same issue, that maybe this will kind of offer a solution to that. Okay, so at this point, you guys probably have all your cards ready and made on Excel, and you're ready to transfer it into Anki so that you can go through them and really retain all that content you've just gone through. So first thing I do before I actually transfer it into Anki is I'll quickly run Excel spell check on all the cards that I've just made, just to make sure there's no little spelling errors that can be a bit frustrating at times. After that, I will copy and paste all the cards that I've made for a specific topic. Now, if you've made lots of cards for different topics, you'd have to do this one at a time so that all your cards don't get mixed up. But basically, I'll just take all those cards from that one topic I might have done, and I'll copy and paste it into a new empty Excel spreadsheet. Now what I'll do is click file and then save as, and this is the important part. Under file format, make sure you save your file as CSV UTF-8. Now in some laptops or computers, that will already be selected for you. In others, you might have to select it yourself, but this is the most crucial step, because this is how Anki will automatically convert all your cards into Anki cards for you. Now you actually want to open up Anki and you want to select the deck in which you want to transfer all these cards into. Now if you have any sub decks or whatnot, just click the one where you want the cards to go into. Then what you're going to do is you're going to actually go into file and then import, and you're going to find the CSV file that you previously saved on Excel, and you're just going to click on that. Now you're going to make sure all the details are correct. For example, you're going to make sure that the correct deck is selected, the correct card type, which in my opinion just keep it as basic, otherwise you might end up messing up all your cards. And then you just import the cards, and you will notice that a little pop-up will come up, and after that all your cards should be imported into Anki. Now in case that explanation didn't make too much sense, what I'll do is I'll leave a link to a video that maybe explains it more in depth so that you can do it in case this one didn't make sense. Now that we've finished making the cards, we come on to actually going through the cards. Now, one thing with Anki is that it will give back as much as you put in. Now, what I mean by that is you will only really find it useful if you're willing to do it daily, do all your reviews, and make sure you're staying on top of it consistently. Now, if you're not, then the truth is that Anki really isn't going to do much for you. It's only after you start developing a habit and you start doing it daily that you notice the improvements. Now, one thing I really like doing that I haven't really heard many people talk about is while I'm doing my Anki cards, I like to have my textbook nearby, whether it be an online or physical version. I like to have it nearby. Now, whenever I get a card wrong, especially if it's a newer card, I will always quickly open up to the textbook, roughly where that bit of information is, and I will just take in the context of that page. Now, you'll remember in the previous segment, I mentioned how knowing the context of the information in your cards can be really helpful in helping you remember and link all your cards, because at the end of the day, learning is almost like a chain reaction. You remember one bit of information and that can help you remember multiple bits of information, and so the more links you make and the more you join up all your content together, the easier it can be to make all those connections. So I find just quickly looking at the textbook, can really help me visualize where that information is meant to be in the bigger picture. And so when I'm actually reviewing the cards and I don't remember the content, that can help me remember it a lot better when that card resurfaces in the algorithm. Now, the last point I want to make is just about being honest with yourself when you're reviewing your cards. Now, Anki's algorithm is completely dependent on how you rate each card that you've reviewed, and so the more honest you are, the more tailored your revision will actually be when you're going through your flashcard. Now, remember, at the end of the day, you're the only one who can see which cards you've gotten right or wrong. No one else can actually see. So there's really no point in being dishonest or marking your cards incorrectly. If you struggled on a card, then make sure you rate it appropriately. And if you found a card easy, then don't be scared to just click the easy button and let Anki deal with the rest. The more honest you are, the more effective you will find Anki, and that will just make sure that every minute you spend on Anki will be as productive as possible, and you won't be wasting your time going through content you already know or not going through the content you need to. And with that, we have reached the end of the video. So I really hope you guys took something useful from this video, and that if you've been on the fence about using Anki or haven't really been sure how to go about it, that this video has hopefully helped you make a decision on how to start. If you did find it useful, please do like the video, subscribe, and just let me know anything I could do to improve the content or just in general what you thought, and hopefully I can provide more useful content for you guys.